Welcome everyone to MailFuzz TV. I am Peter and today I'm going to be talking about Agatha All Along episodes 1 and 2. They're called Seekest Thou the Road, and then episode 2 is called Circle Sewn With Fate and Lock Thy Hidden Gate. So we'll start kind of spoiler free, I guess, since it is a new show. This is a Patreon sponsored series, which is probably answers the question as to why I'm reviewing it. So thank you to Alison for picking the show. This is the latest Marvel Cinematic Universe Disney Plus show. It's the first Marvel Cinematic Universe thing I've watched since, I think, Thor Love and Thunder. I think that was the last one. But that and like the second Doctor Strange, I basically just watched sort of in the corner of my eye whilst I was doing other stuff. That's kind of where my interest was with the Marvel stuff around that time. And the last Marvel show I watched, I think, was She-Hulk. Which I actually finished somehow. I never reviewed all of it, but I did finish it. Luckily, the only thing that I seem to need to have seen for this show is Wandavision, which was the first show that they ever did, and it was something that I did finish. It's something that I reviewed all of, I think, if I remember correctly. So, luckily, I do have the knowledge. Not that I remember it that well. I think there's a lot of faces in this that are actually from that show that I didn't really recognize. I just kind of, from context, got that it was probably a lot of the same faces from that show. Basically because I recognized one person because I know the actor, and then went, oh, I bet all these other characters are from there as well. But anyway, that's another thing to get into. So it's kind of an interesting start. It's 2 episodes debuted this past week, and this has been sponsored in a way that I should be doing it as the episodes come out. Give or take a day every week until it's done. A double premiere, effectively, and it's interesting in that it breaks down into like one episode, which is basically kind of like a bridge episode from Wandavision, where it's like, hey, here's where Agatha was, or left at the end of that show, and we'll do a little bit of a sort of almost homage to that series, and then by the end of the episode, they'll bring her into kind of what her plot's actually going to be. And I feel like episode 2, and I think this is maybe why they put out both episodes together, is that episode 2 then kind of really sets up what the premise of this show is going to be, by and large. The only thing I knew about it, other than it being, you know, Kathryn Hahn's character from WandaVision, was that Aubrey Plaza was going to be in it, which is not a bad thing. I've been a fan of Aubrey Plaza ever since Parks and Rec, and I've liked her in a few things since then. Nothing as much as Parks and Rec, but she's always a good presence, always has a good intensity. She's seemingly the villain of this show, although I don't know if she's going to be the main villain or just one of several villains or whatever, but given that she's a bigger name, I suspect that she is going to be prominent regardless of where she ends up falling on the villain scale. But that is really all I knew. I knew nothing else going into this. I wasn't planning on watching it even. They got sponsored here at the 11th hour, and here I am talking about it. Yeah, how do I feel about these first 2 episodes then? It's alright. It's fine. Like, I think it kind of has that same Marvel show, specifically Disney Plus. And when I said WandaVision was the first show, I meant Disney Plus shows, obviously. There's a few that predate that on ABC and things like that, but by the end of episode 2, they set up a pretty simple kind of... I mean, they don't explain it entirely, right? It's a little bit vague, but it's a pretty simple plot goal, a pretty simple MacGuffin that they're going to be pursuing and hopefully achieve something on. And I kind of got flashbacks to how I felt about other Marvel shows where it already kind of feels like I could see how this was a 2-hour movie that's been kind of split up and stretched out to feel more like a series. And I mean, I could be wrong, right? And it's kind of hard to judge based on these first 2 because the first episode is very separate from the second one. Not separate in the sense that it doesn't lead into it naturally, it does, but just separate in the sense that it feels like episode 2 is the one that really sets up what the story is going to be going forward. The first episode is largely just about kind of fixing where Agatha was and kind of dealing with that. So I think, obviously, I like Kathryn Hahn as a good actress. I think some of the best stuff in these 2 episodes is when she's really kind of going for it and being obnoxious intentionally so. That tends to be when it's the most fun. Aubrey Plaza is very good, although sadly is not in episode 2, so I was missing her in the second episode. Hopefully she pops back up before too long, because I think that would be a detriment. I think episode 1's interesting, because it's like, a lot of it is effectively doing what Wandavision did, which is this idea that she's trapped inside like a TV show kind of thing. In this case, it's like I think the fake opening titles said based on a Danish series, Wandavision or something like that. But the vibe I was getting was Nordic crime thriller, maybe with a little bit of True Detective mixed in. The opening titles actually felt very True Detective-y to me. Because you get fake opening titles where it's just all the character names coming in the first episode. And that's a lot of the first episode, is that. And it's an interesting choice because, on the one hand, it acts as a bridge because this series is a direct sequel in a lot of ways to WandaVision, makes a lot of references, a lot of characters, that kind of thing. But at the same time, I also think that it could be frustrating potentially if they were going to just do the same thing again and have a character be trapped in these TV realities and not really know what was going on. And luckily, I think they knew that, which is why it only lasts one episode. And even in that case, very quickly into the episode, we get Aubrey Plaza's character shows up and quite quickly starts to say things that are clearly outside of the fiction of the TV show they're in. You know, she's saying things where she clearly knows what's going on and is referencing things. So in a weird way, the villain almost becomes the conduit for the audience who already knows what this situation is, even though the main character doesn't quite yet. But it does kind of present this issue, perhaps, if you don't like the joke of them kind of hamming up the tropes of this type of detective show, where she's, you know, walking into the crime scene with her coffee and eating a donut, and she's, you know, saying kind of like ominous things about the town and how the darkness of it and all that, and like there's lots of little things that feel like it's poking fun at shows of that type over the last decade. I think if you're not like feeling the sort of the jokes of that, if you're not feeling the kind of, oh, this is kind of funny that they're making all these little references and she's overdoing the dramatic performance and all that other stuff, I think if you're not quite feeling that, you might be a little frustrated because it's effectively none of it's important, pretty much. It's just kind of where we start, and then by the end of the episode, it kind of goes into like where we're actually going with the show. And I'm kind of two minds about it, because I do think some of the little jokes they make about that type of show are a little funny, especially someone who thinks that those shows are a little bit, I don't know, repetitive, rely on a lot of the same tropes, that kind of thing. Them doing a parody of that almost, in the same way that WandaVision was doing the classic sitcom tropes and things like that. Like, I did kind of appreciate some of it, but at the same time, once it got to sort of, oh, like the reality starting to bleed in kind of part, I was kind of like, oh, you know, okay, fair enough. Like, this is where we're going. But I don't know if the journey of like getting her to like, you know, the real world, as it were, is that exciting on its own. It kind of just feels like we have to go through this motion because of where she was left at the end of WandaVision, rather than because there was a great fun idea of like how to actually kind of like get her out of it. So we just kind of, you know, like I say, it kind of acts as like a homage to WandaVision, which is where this show comes from, but ultimately it's just kind of a bridge to get to like, oh, this is what the show is really about by the end. Yeah, I know I'm not even in the spoiler section yet, and I kind of just described a lot of what the episode is. There's a couple of specific details that I'll get to, but for the most part, like, I don't think there's too much to spoil in the first episode, which you could almost read as a critique in and of itself, that there's nothing worth really spoiling beyond a couple of small things. Episode 2, though, is where it really sets up the thing. It sets up a supporting cast as well, right? It's got, the show does have its own supporting cast, and most of that cast are introduced in episode 2. And then some of his other influences kind of come in as well by the end of episode 2. So, yeah, you know, it's got a bit of a sense of humor. I do think that the goal for the season does feel kind of like a simple MacGuffin, like I said earlier, which feels very par for the course with these Marvel Disney Plus shows to me. You know, it's a little bit pedestrian in how it sets up goal, and then it's like, okay, we're just going to go towards goal. And that doesn't sound like a complaint when you say it out loud. That sounds fine. Like, isn't that a story? But TV shows tend to be a bit more like a bit more like every episode kind of develops it and takes us into sort of new places or throws curveballs at us kind of thing. I feel like this type of premise is more of a movie premise, which brings me back to my initial thing that I was saying about these Disney Plus shows. And this isn't just a Marvel Disney Plus problem. Even the Star Wars shows I tried from Disney Plus had this problem where they felt like there were actually movie ideas stretched out over 8-10 episodes or whatever. Whereas, in a movie, I think a simple premise that you set up in Act 1, you go through in Act 2, and then you sort of give your big payoff, maybe with a swerve in Act 3, makes a lot of sense when you're doing a single piece, a single entity, a story from start to finish in one chunk. Where you're doing this kind of thing, it feels a bit more weird to like leave off and like, this is the premise of what we're doing here. We're literally going down a path to a goal, and that's what we're doing. And I'm sure we're going to find things along the way. I'm sure there's going to be obstacles, and I'm sure there's going to be whatever. But it almost feels like I can almost see the Matrix code of like everything we're going to encounter before we get to the end is just going to be obstacles for the sake of obstacles, because we're going to have trials and tribulations. We're going to do things along the way. Now, it's, of course, if the writing's smart, what will happen is that all these trials and tribulations and obstacles to get to the goal are probably going to, reveal things about characters. They're going to bond along the way. They're going to have fights. They're going to maybe redefine why they're even on this journey and why they're doing this, and so on and so on. Like, there's definitely things they could do that'll add a lot of depth to what the premise is. But I'm not convinced they're going to do that. Obviously, I'm watching the whole thing regardless, but we'll see if that's the case. My gut reaction is to not expect it, just based on the other Disney Plus shows that I have seen. And that's all the Marvel ones I've seen. It's the Star Wars ones that I've seen. I mean, admittedly, I think I only watched one Star Wars one through a whole season. I think the other ones I just dropped out after an episode. But like, there's definitely a level here that I think it's not going to go any deeper than. I think it's going to be pretty surface level, and I'm not convinced of otherwise based on these 2 episodes. And then that's before I even get to talking about like the new cast of characters that we're going to be dealing with here, that are mostly in episode 2, except, as I mentioned, Aubrey Plaza's character, who's only in episode 1 so far. So I'll say spoilers from this point on, so I can, talk about whatever. I don't think I'll say too much more about episode 1. Because the idea that there's a murdered, so we're in spoilers, right? So they, like I say, true crime. Well, one of the characters refers to it as a true crime kick, but it's actually more of a true detective or a Nordic crime drama kind of thing they're going for. But there's a dead body in the forest. Kathryn Hahn's character's detective has been on suspension, and she's just off suspension because she's the only one that can crack this case. It's doing all the cliches, it's doing all the things. And it was actually when she encounters at the library Emma Caulfield's character from WandaVision, where I realized that all of the other characters she was interacting with were probably all the other townsfolk from WandaVision, because I did not recognize them. I kind of vaguely recognized the guy with the mustache once I was thinking about it, but it was only because I know her. I know her as Anya from the hit television show Buffy the Vampire Slayer, but I didn't really, it didn't instantly click with all the other ones. It's only once, I got that clue, and then I kind of just led to assume that the rest were. And seemingly going by the rest of the episode, and then even just looking at the credits, I can definitely see that that's what we're doing. So yeah, but the episode, the actual investigation, the murder, the one detail that's perhaps important is that Agatha keeps some evidence for herself, a little locket that's pretty old that has a little tuft of hair in it, which does feel like witchcraft related, and is probably a real thing that's important to her in some way, even if she doesn't know why she kept it, because she doesn't remember herself in the crime TV show world. But, like I said, Aubrey Plaza comes in as an FBI lady, and she immediately says something like, "Is this really how you see yourself?" And it's clear that that line of dialogue is not from within the TV show, that she's clearly speaking in the sense that she knows this is fake. She knows that Agatha's subconscious is funneling this some way. Obviously, she didn't start the spell. That was Wanda, at least if I remember correctly from the end of WandaVision. I think Wanda did this to her. But this idea that like reality starts to bleed in and like little hints start to happen. The big thing though is that a teenager shows up in her house later in the episode, and by this point, Aubrey Plaza has said a few things that are, you know, clearly meta in the context of not being inside this crime show. But this teenager like runs away. Kathryn Hahn like, you know, runs up to him and catches him or whatever. And she interrogates him, and that's when things start to get really weird, where photographs change to just a front lawn, like the two-way mirror turns into a painting. Reality starts messing around. She ends up in the morgue, and she sees the name Wanda Maximoff on the tag for the dead body. And it's around here where she, you know, properly remembers who she is, and she actually cycles through a lot of the different like versions of herself that we got in Wandavision, the black and white version, the one from like the 70s, and like, so on, and eventually kind of like fully becomes Agatha by the end of it all. There's the whole sequence there where she goes through all these costume changes and whatnot, which, okay, I suppose this leads to something else that I didn't really mention earlier, is that I will admit that when they announced that they were doing this show, when they announced that Agatha from WandaVision was getting her own spin-off, I rolled my eyes. I you know, I didn't... It felt like milking content for more content's sake, rather than because, oh, there's clearly a story there that we need to tell. It's almost like someone has the idea that we need to do an Agatha spin-off. Now, someone go away and come up with a story, instead of someone having an idea and saying, hey, I've actually got a really cool idea for this character. Could we do a spin-off? Now, I don't know for sure it didn't happen that way. I have no way of knowing, but, you know, it's a vibe you get based on a lot of these shows, especially these franchises where there's just spin-off after spin-off, and you end up with 7 Walking Dead shows. It feels more like it's coming from a place of capitalism and wanting to just make more money than it is about anything else. Or in this case, filling up your streaming service with more icons to click on to show value of some kind. So the reason why I'm bringing that up here, though, is that this little moment really banks on the idea that you feel like maybe nostalgia is a strong word because it's only, you know, 3 or 4 years, but this idea that you really cared about WandaVision. So you're excited to see all these references to her various like disguises and characters that she had throughout that season, and then she eventually becomes Agatha, and it's like a big moment, and yada yada. Like, it's really banking on you caring about that, and it kind of like, you know, it's the moment in the episode more than anything else that made me remember, you know, where this came from, and the fact that this show kind of exists more because she became a bit of a meme after the reveal that she was the villain in WandaVision. You know, people were doing the Agatha All Along gifs and sharing them around. And I suppose the other thing I have to admit to here is that that was when WandaVision went down the toilet for me. I did not like the reveal that character was a witch and was a villain. I thought the show was way more interesting when I thought Wanda herself was the villain. Like, she was doing this to herself to punish herself because of her own problems, what she was going through. And it's been too long for me to get into the details of that because I don't remember them all now. But I remember that being kind of the running thinking that I had at the time. There was also all the speculation about the X-Men brother and whatever else, but like, there was definitely something really interesting about WandaVision on a premise level. And I think having kind of a hammy villain show up towards the end was something that I didn't like, and then all the fights that came from that and whatever. So I didn't like any of that stuff at the end of WandaVision, which is probably the other reason why when I heard that it was going to be an Agatha show, I was like, okay. But the internet loved her. The internet were posting memes, or at least the Marvel fans were loving her and posting memes and thought it was a great reveal or whatever. I didn't. So honestly, like, the show was never going to win me over by saying, hey, remember how great it was when you found out about Agatha in WandaVision? That's a bad memory for me. So, you know, I get what they're doing here. On paper, I understand this working for people who really cared about WandaVision, or particularly, I should say, who liked it still at the end. I think that's the important distinction there, because I actually did care about WandaVision up to a certain point. It was the first Disney Plus show that they did, so I was kind of like into giving it a good try. I wasn't sour on the Marvel universe yet at that point. I was on board, and it was doing some weird things. All the sitcom stuff was really interesting. But the last 2 or 3 episodes didn't really like very much. So probably worth mentioning that. And I think this was the moment where I was like, the disconnect for me, because I don't really like the thing that it's referencing back to that much, so it's fallen a bit flat for me. But I acknowledge that if you did really like Agatha in WandaVision, this is probably a big moment for you, right? This is probably the exciting bit you've been waiting all episode for. Me, not so much. So yeah, Agatha ends up like naked, and she like storms out into the street, which is seemingly the real world. All the neighbors who were like tranced into like the WandaVision stuff, they were all part of Agatha's like vision as well, but seemingly here, like, you know, they weren't like doing it, like they were kind of just playing along with her, but they're all living their normal lives in the real world, seemingly. And that's kind of what we see when she's storming around naked, and there's some light comedy here. But that's when Aubrey Plaza shows up, and she's like an evil witch, and she fights Agatha, and Agatha has no power right now. All her power's gone because she doesn't have the book, the Darkhold, which was something that was also teased earlier in the episode. And that's kind of like our main setup, and basically, like, it looks like Aubrey Plaza's going to kill her. Agatha kind of pleads against it a little bit. It says, hey, this isn't that satisfying for you. What if you wait until I get my power back, and then it's a real fight, and then you can actually feel accomplished or something? Either way, Aubrey Plaza seems to be on board with that, but does say, hey, I'm not the only one who wants to kill you. Now that you don't have the Darkhold anymore, other people are coming for you, and they're probably coming by sundown. So that's kind of where we end the first episode, and it teases that some other villainous force is going to come for her, and we get a glimpse of that at the end of episode 2. But the character that I've glossed over here is Teen, which is all we know to call them as. It's what like she calls them, not because she's been a dick, but because there's some kind of magical spell, either like on him or on her, so she can't know more about him, but probably on him, where when he goes to say his name, like his mouth magically mutes and like closes, even though he doesn't realize that this is happening. He thinks he's just saying his name, but she is you know, like not hearing it or seeing it. And then later on, when he's telling her about his backstory and where he's from, that also gets censored, and that there's no sound, even though she can still hear everything else. She can hear the car radio, she can hear what's outside, but she can't hear the speech. So there's something mystical going on there with him, but he's like this young enthusiast who wants to... He says that he came here to break her out of the illusion. He wanted to free her because he wants to be a witch. He's a big fan of witches. He wants to help her. She's very disregarding of him to begin with, but ultimately uses him as a driver and, you know, protege, if you will. I will say this character of Teen, again, there'll be a name that we'll get later in the show probably, but right now they're just Teen, and that's how they're credited on IMDb as well. I will say this character is a little bit annoying for me. Not like aggressively all the time, but there's definitely moments, and this could just be an age thing, where they're speaking like super zoomer, or probably even alpha at this point. I don't know, like I think he says he's 16, so is that alpha territory now, or is that still zoomer? I don't know. But at one point he mentions that his mum's dead, and then just throws in a little RIP afterwards, like he's on like a forum, or like he's you know, he's chatting to someone via text. He puts in a little RIP audibly. It's like someone saying hashtag. It made me wince, and I'm like, I don't like you very much. Don't do that. That's annoying. So I mean, at the very least, I appreciate that Agatha also is finding a lot of that talk annoying, so at least it was making me bond a little bit more with her as a character, so I can't fault that, I suppose. But the premise of episode 2, by and large, is that he wants to go on the Witch's Road, right? Which, obviously, I immediately went, what's that? And then she said, that's a great idea. We need a coven for that, though. I mean, she didn't just say that. And she resisted the idea for a bit, to be honest, but, like, you know, she gets to the point where she's like, yeah, let's do it. Let's go, Witch's Road. But we need a coven. And within 3 miles, there's always enough witchy people to form one, so let's find some people. And they go to, like, a fortune teller in a different town, and this is the first of our kind of, like, ensemble that we're putting together to go. So you have to have a coven to go to the Witch's Road, which is not a physical place per se, but it's like another dimension or something, and witches get unimaginable power if they get to the end of it. Agatha claims that she's done it before and she succeeded, whereas everyone else thinks it's like a fool's errand and thinks it's not going to work. So this episode is very much that her and Teen assembling these characters, none of whom really want to be involved, but ultimately get roped into it in one way or another. Because of their circumstances, whatever. But Lila, it looks like Lilia written down, but I'm pretty sure they were just saying Lila or something close to that. But this old fortune teller lady seems like she's a sham at first, but reveals that she does know who Agatha is and is like, nope, I want nothing to do with this. She does like magically like write out a list of names that are supposed to be on her coven and doesn't even realize that she's written her own name. And she's like, shit. She's also struggling financially. She's not making enough money from her fortune telling, and she's about to be evicted. So there's a lot of reasons why she's down on her luck and probably will show up to help. So it's like, hey, come and see us at 5 p.m. at my house. And that's pretty much it. I guess the other thing to mention about this character is that there's something... I don't know if it's something stalking her per se, but every so often there's like this thing where she'll stop and like the room will shake a little bit, like there's a supernatural force that's like around her, and she looks very concerned. So it's like there's some sort of demonic entity near her or something like that. It seems like something they're going to do with her character over the course of the season, I would expect. And next up on our Witch Vengers is a character called Jennifer Kale, who is selling candles. And it turns out this is like a potion specialist. So the first lady was like a protection spell specialist, I think. This woman is all about potions, and she's doing like candles and fancy candle mixes and stuff, and that's kind of the thing. She wants nothing to do with Agatha either, but it turns out that she's being sued, a class action lawsuit, because people got injured from candles or something. And that's ultimately going to be her motivation to want to come and like get some power back and go about her business. And then after her, we have like the granddaughter of some famous witch. So the character we meet is Alice Wu Gulliver, and apparently her mother was like a rock star who sang a song about the Witch's Road. I'm assuming this song is just made up for the show. If this is a real song they're referencing and having fun with, like, please tell me in the comments. But I've never heard. I was actually trying to think of who the band was supposed to be that they were talking about, and I couldn't think of anything. Anyway, she's not even like a practicing witch. She's like a security guard. She used to be a cop, and she is working at a mall, and doesn't seem like she's going to get involved. She doesn't even get the address, but she shows up later on anyway. I guess the important thing to mention here is that there's a fourth name on the list that Kathryn Hahn is so secretive about and doesn't want to join that she eats the list so that Teen won't see who it is. And when they do show up all at the house, ready to like sort of talk about going on this journey to the Witch's Road, they all say, "Hey, where's the other person? We the what they call it, the Green Witch, basically a witch that controls like plants and the earth kind of thing." An eco-witch, one might call them, a poison ivy, if you will. But Kathryn Hahn or Agatha just runs out and grabs one of the neighbors. Was it Mrs. Hart is the character who I believe was in Wandavision as well, and she doesn't even know what she's sort of coming over for. She thinks it's just a party, and she ends up just coming on this journey with them, not really knowing what it is. But the episode kind of builds up and ends around them doing this song, which is like an incantation to open a door to the Witch's Road, which doesn't seem to work at first, but it ultimately does. The big thing here is that Agatha starts railing them up when it doesn't seem to have worked. And we get reminded during this episode that Agatha is able to steal other witches' powers, but only if the witches fire their powers at her. She can't just take them for no reason. So she basically tries to piss them all off so that they'll start firing their powers at her so she can get a boost or try to steal some magic. And luckily Lila's like, no, she's trying to do this to us. She's trying to do this. While this is going on though, some of those villainous witches or whoever they are show up to come and get Agatha upstairs. And it's like this like row of like people in cloaks like coming down the street. It's all spooky. Teen gets scared. But they kind of just narrowly escape through the staircase that's opened up with the magic spell to go into the realm of the Witch's Road. And this is where the other like big influence what kind of became very apparent actually is that the Witch's Road is very much the yellow brick road from Wizard of Oz. It's not yellow, it's more like a lilac kind of thing. It's like lilac leaves that make up the road, but the shot of the road winding past trees and going into like a mystical land is very Wizard of Oz. Like that seems to be what we're doing in this ensemble. Like I'm not saying they're exactly, you know, the Tin Man and Scarecrow and whatnot, but I feel like a lot of parallels are going to be coming up here. And it also does beg the question, who is that final witch that we didn't hear about? Are they going to end up being the Wicked Witch of the West in this, you know, in the context of this Witch's Road? I don't know. That could be a thing. It is worth mentioning as well that the actual titles of the show that play at the end is full of stock footage of other famous witches, mostly owned by Disney. And, you know, the footage is mostly owned by Disney. There's like a Simpsons one, and there's a, I don't know if The Craft is owned by Disney, but there's a little clip from The Craft in there. There's one from, I think Snow White is the cartoon, but it's been a long ass time, so I don't remember. But yeah, just a bunch of like famous like little snippets of like movie and TV witches are kind of in the ending, along with a bunch of Salem witch trials stuff and clippings and whatnot, which I actually quite like. That I like the opening title sequence, or technically it's the closing title sequence because it plays at the end in this show. But I did kind of like that. It had a kind of a cool vibe to it. So yeah, I mean this episode sets us on that journey of like, okay, we're in this mystical land, going down this road. They take off their shoes because you do this barefoot, I guess, for reasons, and off they go. So that's kind of just, you know, what I was saying earlier, that this feels more like the first act of a movie than it does the opening of a TV show. It just feels like the sort of thing that you'd get a good hour, maybe an hour and a half out of this journey once they've set it up, rather than, I think, 7 episodes we're going to get past this. There's 9 total, so we'll get 7 more episodes. I wonder what that's going to be filled with, if all the things that happen to him along the way are going to feel like they're worthwhile enough that I feel like that we're getting full stories out of it. If it feels like we're just doing, you know, an obstacle before we get back on the road and that's it. Because I think that might feel very repetitive if it's just like, oh, this is this week's obstacle and they figure it out and they get through and whatever. But there is a risk here that it's just going to feel like a bunch of writing roadblocks that they have to get through, and then all of the important stuff won't actually happen until the last couple of episodes. I think that's my concern right now, because it's been set up in such a way that it feels like that would be very easy to do it that way, and I think that'll be less interesting. That said, though, they could do that, but then the actual like individual episodes could be so entertaining on their own that it wouldn't matter that much because they'll just be so fun. But I'm skeptical. I'm definitely skeptical of that. I mean, the characters, you know, by and large, like I said, Teen's a little bit annoying, too enthusiastic, and kind of naive. It gets a little bit on the nerves. The other characters, I don't really have too much to say. I kind of like that they all hate Agatha, because at least the contempt that you can feel backwards and forwards in the dialogue is probably some of the more fun stuff in the episode, particularly episode 2. So that's something. Them kind of calling her out on her bullshit is also maybe one of the more entertaining things that the show has done so far. But I definitely was missing Aubrey Plaza, and I do wonder where Aubrey Plaza is going to be throughout the rest of the season. In fact, actually, if I was to make a guess right now, I suppose I would say that Aubrey Plaza's character is probably the last name in that list, which is why Agatha didn't want to pick her. That actually feels like the most likely scenario now I'm thinking about it. So we'll see if that's the case. I don't know for sure though. It's definitely an interesting pair of episodes because, like I said, it feels like episode 2 is the one that really sets up what the season is, and episode 1 is just this kind of like, hey, remember Wandavision? We're going to kind of do that kind of thing again. But then by the end of the episode, kind of bring it back into like setting up what episode 2 is going to be, and then that sets up the whole show. It's not a bad way of doing it. I'm not necessarily mad at it. But you know, like how much of episode 1 feels like it really mattered in hindsight now, other than a couple of maybe specific little teases or whatever. I don't know, the illusion, you know, is kind of like wavered a little bit with Marvel, where back when WandaVision was actually airing, there was this idea that it was going to build to a really interesting conclusion, and it like all of the surreal kind of almost David Lynch feeling of doing the TV show thing felt like it was hiding some subtext or hiding some just some ideas where you could really theorize over it. And I remember one of the big disappointments towards the end of that show was that a lot of people watching it, myself included, were really treating it like a show that you could theorize over and really talking about all the things, all the interesting stuff that it could be doing, as if it was something that was from even something like a Lost, right? Not even to go like the extreme David Lynch example. And instead, it ended up not being that complex. It ended up being really, really simple. And aside from it just being like a goofy kind of villain that they introduced towards the end, it also just kind of felt a little underwhelming in that sense. So I'm really hesitant to sort of like let myself get invested in that way. And not that it's a problem necessarily, because it seems like with episode 2, we're not doing that again anyway. But I think that's what my problem was in episode 1, is that I just didn't want to like enjoy thinking about what all the things in the true crime world meant, because I don't think it fundamentally mattered that much in Wandavision, even though I assumed it was going to. So here, it just kind of felt like a bit of an obstacle to get to the start of the real plot. Now, how good is that real plot going to be now that we've set it up? I don't know. It really could go anyway. If I was to give my just like, raw opinion of it right now, I would say it seems perfectly fine and serviceable, but none of it's really exciting me that much. But I'll be back for episode 3 next week anyway, because it's a sponsored show, and I will give it all the effort in the world to try and enjoy it as best I can. But I will not lie if I don't. No one's asking me to review stuff to just sugarcoat things. I'll come in here with the hard-hitting opinions that people expect and have come to love and cherish from Male Fuzz TV. I don't know what I'm saying anymore. I'm just trying to sound jovial to end this, so it's not all like negative. This has been my thoughts on episodes 1 and 2 of Agatha All Along. And I'll see you next week for episode 3. A day or two after it is went out, because I think it's Wednesdays it goes out. I'll have to double check that, but so it'll probably be Thursday or Friday. So I'll see you for that. You can of course support the channel, keep all the reviews coming yourself by going over to patreon.com/malefuzztv and getting some bonuses for your trouble. Or if you'd rather do YouTube memberships, that's also an option. You can do that easier just on YouTube itself. Any support is really appreciated. It's the reason why I can keep doing this, both on this channel and over in Male Fuzz Movies. If you like the idea of movie podcasts with myself and others, go check out the other channel. But that is me, so thank you very much for joining. I do appreciate it. Keep watching TV. Have you got any vanilla?